Trauma bonds. Have you ever heard that word? Let me help you understand with Ellie's story today. Trauma bonds happen to people who get into relationships that mimic their trauma backgrounds, and it often feels exciting, sexually charged, and captivating, not because it's good for you, but only because it's familiar to you. Let me tell you a few of Ellie's dating scenarios that were constantly mimicking her trauma bonds and how she kept overriding her truth, going back into her ways of dealing with trauma in the past to allow more trauma to be reinvited in her life. Let's go on a date with Ellie today. Ellie meets this really good-looking guy through Instagram and decides to fly out to meet him. And throughout the date, they both had mutual interest of going and being athletic together. And he kept putting her down and saying, you're not strong enough, you're not tough enough. At some point, she started bleeding and crying, and he basically said she's such a wuss. Ellie was head over heels over this guy and came to session with me to understand how to get this guy to treat her better and to love her, and how she can toughen up so he wouldn't put her down so much. She could not see that this was classic abusive behavior. This is psychological abuse. This is a guy that's putting you down, making you feel bad, has absolutely zero emotional empathy, and has no inner protector in him to care for her when she's hurt and damaged. In fact, he put her down for being hurt and damaged. This was an exact mirror to how she was treated as a child from her father, and who punished her when she did something wrong and then made her feel bad for crying about it. And so she had to learn to separate that draw to a guy like this who replayed her past trauma history. And so we did a lot of work. We did a lot of trauma release work. We had her work on overriding that feeling of being quote unquote turned on, which is just excitement, and which excitement is rooted in fear, which is basically not confusing her fear or overriding her fear as emotional bonding in any way. It was quite a tough journey for her to separate the two, because love and pain were so intertwined together for so long that she really didn't know the difference. And at some point, she finally had her breakthrough to realize, like, okay, if I go on a date with a guy and he makes me cry right away, it's not the right guy for me. After doing all of that work, she put herself out there again to start dating and hopefully having a better vetting process. And she did. She ended up meeting a guy who had zero predatory behavior, was way more protective, respected her boundaries, allowed her to take the lead when she needed to, fully accepted and appreciated her no. However, there was this caveat around the second time that she was attempting to find love. Ellie learned to separate abuse from attraction, which was a huge milestone. However, she was still really emotionally shut down. And so she couldn't see the fact that this love interest still had zero empathy and didn't have any emotional capacity or bandwidth to support her, because Ellie was not comfortable with or accustomed to showing emotional vulnerability. And as hard as it was, we worked through this relationship for her to lead with her emotions, to lead with her vulnerability, to say that she's hurt, to say that she's sad, to say that she's lonely. Didn't change the way that this love interest treated her, but what changed in her was her capacity to express vulnerability, which is so important for her to find a safe and loving partner. And the more she was emotionally available, the more the chasm between the guy that she was dating and her emotional availability started getting bigger and bigger. Because the more she built awareness around emotional availability, the more it became clear how emotionally unavailable this guy was. He was incredibly avoidant, wasn't responsive half the times, wasn't true to his word, and put her back into an anxiety spiral, because even though she wasn't being harmed by him, she was still being hurt by him, in the sense of not knowing when he's going to show up, not knowing if he's going to follow through, completely lonely when she was sad or upset or hurt in any way. And so this relationship fizzled out, and Amy had to process the grieving that she had to do in this relationship, go through her mourning process, develop a stronger sense of self-worth, develop a stronger capacity to express her wants, her needs, and emotional sensitivities. And that was one of the first times that she was actually identifying those parts of herself. She was so disconnected with them because of her trauma background. And she became more and more whole, more and more integrated, had a new definition of what it meant like to be treated well, had a new definition of how to express her emotions and vulnerabilities, and she was ready to go and put herself out there again. I'm so proud of Ellie. She didn't give up on love. And third time around, she finally met someone who was safe, emotionally available, and looking for the same thing that she was looking for. And that's because she finally knew how to clearly express her truth behind all of the walls she had up because of her trauma background. All of her walls had come down, and she showed up authentic, vulnerable, emotionally available, and found the same thing being mirrored right back to her in her relationship. Ellie is now in the beginning stages of a new, safe, and loving relationship, and the part of this relationship that feels best and most comfortable for her is the slower pace. Again, because of her trauma background, she, if it were to be rushed any further, it would bring up some trauma fears and her walls would go back up. And so all she has to do is communicate that. And because her partner is so in tune with her, he's happy to work with her pace. And that's the reason why they're thriving together, because he knows how to listen to her. If you can resonate to any part of Ellie's story, I would love to hear about your experience in the dating world, how you may have overcome any trauma bonds, and hear if any part of this video has helped you. All right, see you in the next video, and may peace be with you.